welcome to Family Childcare Insights Podcast, where we shine a light on family childcare, the unicorn of early childhood education. We are Donna Fowler and my bestie here, Patricia Dishler, and we are excited to begin this conversation with you. Patricia and I, we question everything and a wide variety of guest experts that we'll have on our show. We uncover best practices, we talk about the challenges and the opportunities for change. We like to start our podcast with what's on your mind. And so today, what's on my mind is that I've been doing a lot of reading of research and articles on what early childhood education looks like internationally. And one of the things that I've discovered is that the United Nations passed Article 12 many years ago that really talks about giving voice to children, and that even young children, as young as infants, need to have voice in their learning. And it's really made me start thinking about what does that actually look like? How do we ensure that we're truly following children's lead in our programs? How are we truly listening to what's important to them? What's important to their families, and so forth. And so I'm really excited to continue to learn about that and figure out how family childcare providers are listening to children's voices within their own program, how the larger educational system is really thinking about how we listen to children and their voices, and seeing how that fits with in the United Nations article on giving children a voice.
Very interesting.
It is extremely interesting. So, what's on your mind, Patricia?
A couple of things. One is conferences. It's the beginning of the year, and so there's lots of conferences coming up in the early childhood education field, and we're trying to figure out which ones do we want to go to. There's as professionals, I'm sure all of you are doing the same thing, looking at your calendar and think about what's coming up. There's the NAFCC conference, National Association for Family Childcare, which of course we want to be a part of. There's the NACE conference, National Association for the Education of Young Children. There's the BUILD conference. There's many things happening this year. They're all wonderful, and trying to decide which ones. We can't be at all of them, so trying to figure that out is something we're trying to work on right now, get our proposals in. So we hope that all of you can attend those conferences and we get to meet you face to face and have those conversations, question you as much as we question each other. I think that'll be a lot of fun. And then I also have Philadelphia on my mind. I'll be taking a train tonight to Philadelphia. Going to spend the week there visiting classrooms and family childcare providers, and just really curious to see all the great work that they're doing. They've got a very big pre-K project going on in Philadelphia that supports all of the facilities that provide early childhood education, including family childcare. I got some fantastic coaches working with them on it through Shine, the coaching organization that is doing that work. And I'm really excited to see how things are going.
Yeah, I know you've worked with them in the past, so I know it's going to be exciting to see how much they've grown
Yeah,
since the last time you've been with them.
for their project, I think.
That's super exciting. It's just exciting now to see more and more states that are including family childcare in all of the initiatives that they're doing. We know that in the past that always hasn't been the case, that it's really been a lip service.
Today's topic and question of the day, which is how we frame all of our Family Childcare Insight podcast, is how does the Ohio AEYC support family childcare? So we are really thrilled to have our guest here today, Kim Tice, the Executive Director of Ohio AEYC. Kim was one of our first organizations that we collaborated with and did some data dive and just spent a lot of time asking questions and having some really deep conversations with. So we're really excited to circle back to her, see how things have been since our last conversation and what's going on. We know that you had a big report coming out in collaboration with Groundworks lately. So really want to hear all about that. So Kim, why don't you start by just giving us a little bit of background about who your organization is and what your connection with family childcare is?
Sure. My name is Kimberly Tice. I'm the co-executive director at Ohio AEYC. And a little bit about myself is many years ago, I also was a family child care provider. So I have a special heart for this work. And Ohio AEYC is the state affiliate for the National Association for the Education of Young Children. So in one sense, we like to think that we've always supported family child care providers because we provide services to all people in all roles in all settings. But I think also when you learn better, you need to do better. And the pandemic really identified for us that there was a much greater need to more intentionally focus on family child care because of the critical services they provide, but also because of the inequities in funding and attention that they receive in our industry.
Well, we were excited to work with you and have that conversation years ago. Why don't you tell everybody a little bit about what started our conversations with each other, what the project was?
Sure. As I mentioned, the idea of working more intentionally, and we were able to secure a grant from Groundwork Ohio, our advocacy partner. And one of the purposes of that was to try to develop a more organized voice for family child care, to elevate the work they do, to hear about their experiences and expertise, but to also to get some data to inform a report that we were hoping to do and to support our advocacy. So one of the goals of the State of Family Childcare report that we were going to do was to first identify who are the family childcare providers in Ohio, what are their strengths, what are their challenges, what are their characteristics. So we wanted all the data, but we also wanted to connect with experts who could not only connect the data, but could connect the stories to create a really compelling version of here's the data, but here's the real lived experiences of these people. So when we thought about who could we reach out to that could provide a combination of both the data and the stories, we reached out to both of you and the consulting firm to just begin this work. And I think that you started this out about talking about questions. And I think that's one of the things we found over and over again was what were the right questions to ask? Where could we get the information? And I'll let you go to the next question, but I have a lot more on that. I'll see where you want to steer this conversation.
Oh, well, that's exactly where we wanted to go is, what was kind of surprising about all that? What were the things that, we got thinking about and talking about that maybe hadn't been thought about or tracked?
Right. And I think that was part of what was so wonderful about our work, was having you ask questions to us and realizing, well, wonderful and challenging, and realizing we didn't have the answers to a lot of those questions. And many of those questions we had not even asked. But once we identified what we needed to know, then it came a totally different layer of where do we get this information? Who has this information? And we did surveys, we did interviews. One of the most revealing pieces was that a lot of the data wasn't out there. Nobody was collecting it, or it wasn't coordinated. It was just in some data dump somewhere that no one had actually taken the time to download, evaluate, and come up with some actionable steps for the data. So that, I think, is an ongoing challenge, but that we're hoping, and we've seen some steps with our state to invest more funding and actual data collection and to segregate it out, because we often collect the data as the early childhood world, and then someone says, well, what about family child care providers? And it's not necessarily separated out to give a true picture of what we're doing.
Yeah, and that's not unique to Ohio. I think it was something we also tried to convey so that there's a little grace there in knowing that this isn't unique to Ohio. That family childcare in general is often not tracked as closely. The questions aren't asked. And even when family childcare is included in data, all family childcare programs are all kind of lumped together as a single number in the data. But as we've identified in our exchange article, there's this whole spectrum of family childcare, and they have different business models and different practices, and it doesn't work to lump it all together. You need to dig a little deeper,
Right.
and find those intricacies.
Right.
Yeah, I think that the work is so complex that I think going back, Kim, that often we don't know what questions to start with to really unravel what is the next question. And then, but once we start unraveling all that, I think I heard you say that it was easy then to really start to think about, does the data exist? Who has it? How do we start thinking about how we bring the data together to really tell a magnificent story on how we can support the field of family childcare.
Mhm. And I think that it's finding that balance of we need some broad stories and data around the profession of family childcare. And yet, one of the statements I've made during this work is if you've met one family childcare provider, you've met one family childcare provider. It just is so individual and unique, but that's the strength of them. But it's hard to communicate that to decision makers sometimes and others.
Right. Well, kind of like how we say in our opening that, family childcare is kind of the unicorn of the early childhood education field, and that nobody knows what they're looking at or what to do with it. It's just so different than everything else that's out there that it's easy, I think, sometimes when people don't understand it to just put it in this one bucket and kind of, say, okay, that's just all family childcare, because they're just not putting the energy into diving into the details, because it is so complicated. It can feel overwhelming, and it's just easier to kind of leave that alone. But we loved it that you were like, let's dive in, let's dig in. We wanna know that. Was there anything specific in the dive and the conversations that we had that was kind of surprising about maybe what wasn't found, what you couldn't get your hands on?
Well, first of all, we did a small sample with the balance survey report, and even though it was a small sample, so if anyone's listening to this, go with what you have. It gave us meaningful data, but it also has given us a reason to continue to request more funding and say, if we did this statewide, if we did this by community, what stories could this tell? What information could it give us? I think perhaps some of the surprising pieces to me was the stressors of the family and having a business in their home. And I think it's maybe just because we hadn't had those conversations. I remember something really meaningful of, so, we think family child cares are all moving out of this because of regulations, for example. And some may be. But one of the stories told was that their family was exhausted from having to go and eat their dinner upstairs while the family childcare provided meals for the children. And it just, I hadn't thought of that. And it just became, so a lot of the balance between the personal and professional. And I think, so for me, one of the things it did was there's a lot of services provided through state funding, such as free professional development, free curriculum, all good things. We want those things, but we need an and to it. And I think that was one of the things that was revealed to me in the report is the personal side. It draws them to this business, keeps them in this business, and their desire and need for support from other peers to navigate this. So.
Yeah, that sense of belonging is so important, and creating those networks and those connections for providers, and as you talked about, one of our focuses in our balance report is that we're looking at that holistic approach for providers. And like you said, there's that educator, that caregiver, but there's also that business person. And then there's also that personal piece that this is very personal work. It's in your own home. It doesn't get more personal than that. It affects your family when they come home and how they feel about it. And so all of that needs to be looked at and supported and figured out, where does the provider need support? Because for some it's in one of those areas, and for others it's a completely different area. And that's why it doesn't work to just lump them all together and make assumptions about what they need. Why don't you talk about where that went? I know the groundworks report just came out and there's a lot going on. You had also mentioned, you and I had a great conversation recently talking about testifying in front of a legislator. Why don't you tell us a little bit more about all the advocacy work you guys are doing with things you
Try
found?
to keep it.
Oh, and Kim, the group. I know that you also started a family child care listening group. I want to hear more about that.
We've done
Tell
more.
us it all.
Well, I would say, a lot of this escalated or elevated when the pandemic started. And one thing we started doing at that point in time was we started holding these weekly courageous conversation calls and said to people, show up when you can. We don't have all the answers. Let's process this together. And what was interesting is we invited all. Family child care providers showed up, Head Start showed up, public preschool child care centers. And so what I think that first did was it just was a place of relationships and peers, but it also began to form more of a community, because even in the beginning, people would say things like, oh, well, Center Base has it so easy because you get to do this. And Center Base would be like, well, family child care providers don't have to XYZ. And they really hadn't been in community with one another. So I think just having the opportunity for them to really hear about the other's business model experiences began to bring respect to both groups. So that's still going on. We've asked them, hey, you want to go monthly? Nope, they still want to keep meeting. But we also identified that there's a need, and we want family child care providers to see themselves as part of the bigger early childhood community, but they also need a place where they can be with themselves, talk about their stories, their specific issues. So we also, out of that, created what we're calling the Ohio Family Child Care, Ohio Family Child Care Advisory Council. And so we bring them together, provide sometimes some, let them know what's going on at the state, some issues that are particular to them. A lot of the time is them elevating issues. There were some issues around hero pay, and we would have never really known or recognized it, but they recognized the issue. I may not explain it exactly correctly, but the issue was that owners could not access hero pay, which makes sense. If you're an owner of multiple centers or whatever, the hero pay was intended for the frontline workers. So although family child care providers, if you go into our registry, are identified teachers, administrators who were eligible, they were owners. So they were not eligible. And even though I read that initially, it just didn't click into me. So until they said this, and so really what it was I think Ohio AEYC is more of the convener of, and they raise the issues and then we can help move it forward. So we did get that move forward. We did, they helped with the wording and helped explain everything. Did get that changed, so that was successful. But it's an ongoing process. And this is not just related to funding, but it's related to regulations. And I think you've shared this with us. It's not unique to Ohio, that most regulations, most projects, most funding is created with the lens of center-based. And then let's tweak it for family child care, or sometimes let's add them in later. But it's not developed from the family care perspective from the beginning. And then they need to raise it up and are sometimes seen as complaining when it's really not complaining. It's just, you forgot.
You left us out to start with. So
Right.
we're just speaking up.
If they were included in the planning and the decision-making process from the beginning, it could have been alerted. Another example was with the stabilization grants. There was a big emphasis in the beginning on, healthy things. So centers were buying washers and dryers. Family child care providers could buy a washer and dryer too if they wrote an affidavit that they would only use the washer and dryer for their family child care business and never use it for their family. So, as we know, all of us have room for two washers and dryers. All of us have room for two washers and dryers in our homes, right? But if they had included, either if there had been a unified voice for family child care at that point or included family child care providers, they could have easily said, use the time-space percentage that is allowed by the IRS, and that whole issue could have been avoided. So I share those examples just as ways that the more their voices are included early on in the process, then things can be developed to meet their needs better. So there's that. Along the stabilization grant lines as well, after the first round, family child care providers, the funding really was an inequitable funding, and we couldn't get explanation on it. And we finally got invited to bring providers to the table with the state decision makers and to share about the inequities. So they had their talking points, and again, I did limited talking, but they all told their stories. And one of the family child care providers very clearly laid out the inequities. And one of the state agency representatives said, well, I hear you, but if we make this change, family child care center-based providers are going to give us such pushback, because that means they're going to get less funding for their stabilization grants. And without any prompting, we had center-based providers on the call who spoke up and said, she's clearly shared that this is inequitable. And even if it means that we get less funding, we need all the funding we can get, this should be corrected for the family child care providers. And I just got chills because it just showed, a unified voice of all of them that knew this wasn't correct. And they themselves told their stories and spoke. I didn't have to say, well, I think center-based would agree with this. It was center-based providers stating that. So I think those are illustrations of the importance of them telling their stories. We used to proudly say, we advocate on behalf of early childhood educators. And now we say we empower early childhood educators, because they're the ones who should be sharing their lived experiences, their knowledge, their expertise, and we can be the facilitator or the convener.
I love that. I mean, that is such an important lesson, I think, for other organization leaders to hear and to know, because that's happening a lot. I mean, there's a lot of organizations in the broader early childhood education field that say, oh, we're inclusive of family child care. We want to help family child care. We are going to advocate on your behalf. You hear that a lot from different organizations. And one of the books that we're reading right now, that quote
from the
from the back, where it said, there's some proverb that says, if you're going to cut a man's hair, he should be in the room.
That's great.
We've got to have the actual voice, the actual person there present. And so having all these people that aren't family child care providers, just talk on their behalf without having them in the room in some way and having their voice heard in some way, just doesn't work. You don't get all the intricacies of what providers can be and what their businesses can be without it. And so that's one thing that we just really applaud the Ohio AEYC on the work that you do, because as you said, it's not just on behalf, it's empowering them to have a voice and to use it, to be speaking directly to legislators rather than you just representing their voice going. That's wonderful. We'd love to see more of that happen across the nation.
And when you speak of legislators, another piece that's going on in Ohio, there was some real threats to our quality rating and improvement system to do away with it, primarily to save money, but also on the good side of it, to reduce administrative burden. And as part of that work, we were able to utilize pieces of the report that we got from you to provide written testimony to really educate the legislature on what this business model for these people were. That was helpful. We had family child care providers who provided in-person and written testimony, which was really great. And a couple things that came out of this is the legislature just signed, and our governor signed a bill that the state needs to provide a report by May 2023 to identify, to encourage people entering family child care and identify the barriers to them providing family child care. And what I'm most pleased about is it says, and periodically thereafter. So to me, that's like, this is, it's not a one-time deal. And so on the one hand, you can look and we can say all the work, all the testimony didn't result in something transformative. Didn't necessarily expect it to, but there's, like you said, there's a door open, there's attention being given to this. And as we talked about earlier, Groundwork just released our family child care report, elevating family child care in Ohio. And I think we're going to use that report in a lot of ways. One, we wanted to make sure that the family child care providers, that there's lots of quotes from family child care providers in there. Many of them came from the survey, but so that they could feel when they read this report, I'm represented here. That's who I am. And here's a professional report about the work that I do. So that was one purpose of the report. The other purpose of the report is to truly educate the legislatures, but even the decision makers who work at state agencies about this work, about who they are, about what they want to do. Because I think your report and this report showed that in spite of the challenges, these people are passionate, educated, committed, interested in providing quality. It may look different in every setting, but that there are barriers that we need to address. But we need to not just say, here's the support you need, here's the resources you need. It's not one stop or one shop fits all. It's got to be multiple supports in multiple ways. So we're excited that, again, that report's just been released, but I see that we're going to be using that in many different ways.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah, I was really excited to read all the, like you said, all the quotes directly from providers. It really clearly shared that provider voice directly, not just hearsay. And I also liked how it talked about the passion that they have, like you had said, that this is something that there's a lot of providers that are saying, it's tough. There's all these challenges. I don't make hardly any money at all. I think that they said the average pay was like $9 something per hour for family childcare. And yet I'm trying because I love what I do and I love these families and I want to stick with it. So help me keep doing this, but you've got to be realistic. I've got a family, I've got a mortgage to pay, I've got bills to pay, and you can't do that on $9 an hour. So, what's going to happen here? And of course, we know we can't just raise rates and put it on the backs of families because families are at their stretch point too. So I think it did a really good job of kind of laying that out, that we've got the, and especially paired with the beginning where it talked about the pandemic and how there were so many providers that provided care to those essential workers that decided I'm going to be open. And in many places in the country, that was the only thing that was open for essential workers. And so that just shows the passion and how providers are like, I want to care for our community. I want to make sure our essential workers can get to work and that, this community can function and people can work and their children can be, cared for, loved, and educated. But we've got to make it work for them as individuals as well. We can't just say, well, good, we need somebody to do that, and not worry about the toll it takes on the individual.
And I guess I wanted to add, I may have forgotten this, but the emphasis on the report that the legislature has put out is to attract new family child care providers and remove barriers from new family child care providers entering. We're working on ways to give them that and more than what they asked for, because my fear is we don't want to draw a whole bunch of new excited people into this field and then they leave 6 months to a year later. That it's got to be an and. We do want to bring people into this field. I'd love for people not to see this as a default, but a true career option that they could choose and give them autonomy and direction. But we've got to address the barriers to staying in the field as well as the barriers to.
Yeah, I think, Kim, I recall that from the work that we did during the survey is that we saw that there are providers that are actually coming into the field, but there's this like sweet spot between the 3 to 5 year range where there seems to be this like really big dip, right, of people leaving. And so by having that kind of data to really say, okay, so are we bringing folks in? Or I mean, we even talked about, I believe in the data is are we tracking those who begin the process versus those who finish the process of becoming licensed or registered, and where are the hiccups in that process that we could kind of look at. But once our job isn't done, once they become a family child care provider, we have to figure out what are the unique supports. And for each family child care provider, as you said, I love that quote. I'm going to carry that forever with me. Once you've met a family, if you've met a family child care provider, you've met a family child care provider, right? Because each of their needs are unique, and we have to figure out how we're meeting that to keep them in the field. And so this emphasis on not only recruitment but retention, and I like the fact that you guys are really thinking about that.
Yeah, I agree that there's a crack in the door. If they're saying, okay, let's figure out how to pull people into this field, they're at least having a conversation about what is family childcare, what draws people into it. And I think you can kind of blend in that retention kind of conversation into that, because it's really hard to convince somebody to go into a business where they're going to make $9 an hour. Especially if you're saying, well, if we want you to come and do this, and we want you to come and do this and be top level in our quality rating and improvement system. And we're going to give you these supports so you can come in and you can be this really strong thing and you can have education behind you and all that stuff. It doesn't take long for the business owner part of their, body to start adding up the numbers and going, wait a minute. You want me to get this equipment, get this furniture, spend all this money on education. There's all these costs for me to go into it. And when I'm done with all of that, I'm going to work 60 to 80-hour weeks and make $9 an hour.
And share it with my whole family.
And share it with, have them do it too.
My whole family.
That's a hard sell. So if you want to address, recruitment, you almost can't have that conversation without also addressing what ends up being the retention issues, because even when they do jump in without really understanding the costs and the toll of their family, because there's lots that do just dive in and go, well, I'll figure all that out. But that's gotta get addressed line. So I think there's cracks in the door that they open that you can kind of wiggle those conversations into to get them addressed.
And I think because you've opened that door of really how do we attract folks to the field, it's this really great opportunity to think about who would come into this field, right? What is the unique what's a sweet spot, right? I mean, I've been in states where folks say, "Oh, we should be in high schools." Well, no, we're not recruiting family childcare providers out of high school because most of them don't have their own home
Right,
to
right.
do this work in, right? Um,
You kind of need a
yeah,
home
you
to
kind
do home-based childcare, right?
Indeed.
but what is it? What, and I think one of in the work that we've done is really uncovering, that how many providers actually the differences, some come in because they have their own young children that they want to care for, some because they have a love of, just caring for children, had worked in a center-based care but want to do something a little bit more unique, that they can have a little bit more control over. There are many, many different. Some folks grew up in family childcare, want to carry that legacy, but really understanding what the sweet spot.
Yeah. Well, and one of our board members works at a community college, and after we sent this report out, she replied back that she actually talks about family childcare as a career to her students, so that they can consider it. And she said, because we've been talking about this, one of the considerations during the pandemic, there were a lot of public school teachers who created these little pods, like mini learning online communities or whatever. And they found that the autonomy they had versus the rigid push down that we're seeing in schools, and we also see that in childcare as well, that that was something that was very appealing. Was yes, you want the legitimacy of being licensed and hopefully achieving quality, but being able to have the autonomy to truly have your philosophy and
Mhm.
ability to.
That's what brought me in.
Okay, great.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I think that I worked at a center and just, the philosophy of it just did not match. It was really difficult fit for me. And I'm like, I've got very strong independent ideas as to what I think is right. And I want to be able to make those decisions for the children that I'm caring for. And that's what got me thinking about it.
I think another thing all of this work is done and is to put family childcare providers top of mind in all the work we do. So, when we are doing certain events, how are we making family childcare providers aware of this? Are they interested in this topic? Whatever, that type of thing. But also, when we read legislation or new regulations that come out, we're reading it with that lens, which I won't say we always did as intentionally as we do now. And in addition to that, as I've said before, we've had family childcare providers who are members of Ohio AEYC since the beginning of time. Um, Everyone can nominate themselves for a position on our board, but I'm not sure in my memory, and I have a long-term history, that either we ever had someone who nominated themselves who was actually elected. But we were able, and intentionally this year, added 3 family child care providers to our board, and we did that. We did that again. And I keep using the word intentionally because we didn't want to invite one family child care provider and make her be the voice of the whole family child care world. So we have someone who's in a very rural community, one who's in the city of Columbus, and another who's in northeastern county, but also is connected to the resource and referral. And all of them are connected to the family child care community. And so we didn't want to just add one and have that person feel like maybe they couldn't speak up with everyone else there. So they have their own little kind of community to support themselves and to bring that perspective to the work that we're doing. So we're actually really proud pleased and excited about it.
Oh, well, that is so odd. We're so excited to hear about all the great work that you guys have done, the things that you're doing in the future, this new shift on your board and the point of view. So moving forward, we want to wrap up here, but we want to make sure that if anybody listening is interested in joining that monthly conversation that you're talking about, the different things you're doing. I know you have a conference coming up. So where can people go to get some more information about all of this?
Well, everyone can go to our website at www.oaeyc.org. And if there's anything that I've talked about that you can't find here, we have contact information. Feel free to reach out to us. This is I'll lastly share this. We could do a whole nother podcast on this, but it's all about the relationships and the relationships we've built through this time. So I say that when I say contact us, we mean contact us. If you're a family child care provider, call me in the evening, call me on the weekend. We've figured this out. And so I think that we truly do want to connect with you if this is something you're interested in. Thank you for that opportunity to give that plug there. Appreciate it.
Oh, it's wonderful. Yeah, you are a very accessible organization. That's evident in the group that you've pulled together and the board members that you've attracted. And we're excited about the continued work that you guys are going to do. We also want to encourage any of our viewers and listeners to send us questions. If you have questions more about Ohio AEYC, we can always pull Kim in to get some more answers for you. So we love to hear your questions as much as we like to ask our own. So please share those on our different website. Our social media links are all on our website for Facebook, Twitter, our YouTube channel. You can add in your questions and comments. And like you said, a lot of that will lead to future topics, podcasts, and maybe we'll have Kim back again and see how things are going at some point in time. But thank you, Kimberly, so much. We really appreciate all the conversations we've had in the couple of years we've gotten to know each other, and look forward to continued questions and conversations moving forward, and wish you the best with all the work of the Ohio AEYC. Thank you very much.
Thank you. 5-star review for your work with us. We really appreciate it.
So before we wrap up today, we like to share a short segment on what we're reading. Both Patricia and I are avid readers, trying to always keep up with best practice, thinking about how we use the information that we read to not only further the work that we're doing, but how does that actually impact the work that you're doing and so forth. So today what we're going to share is a book that Patricia and I actually have been reading called Measure What Matters by John Doerr. And just through other work that I've done, I've come across this. What's interesting is as you start to read a lot of these books, you will find those authors actually recommending other authors. Mm-hmm. And I think that's how we come across a lot of the work that we do. But Measure What Matters, what I found fascinating about it, really, Patricia, is that it's about thinking big and bold about what we want to do, where we want to be, right? And I think if it's, I'm not quite sure of the exact quote, but it's about if you reach 100% of your goals, you're not thinking big enough, right? And so how do you really think really bold, and then really try to think about how do you set milestones, what they would call key results, right? So your objective is this, like they call it the
big hairy goal,
right?
And so I like what you said about that it's this higher than whether or not you can actually do it, because I think we've helped different board members and things like that. We've done a lot of board work in setting goals, setting objectives, things like that, and too often they think of here's what we're doing right now, what we're actually accomplishing right now, and let's set our objective and our goal to be that. And it's like, how is that a goal? You're already doing it. You already reached that. Put that behind you. You said that you got to raise the bar. What are you going to do next? What's going to do next? And that's what I really liked about it, is that it really stretched you to think not just what are we doing now, what we think we can maybe just do next, but where are we headed? Like, what's the
Right.
long term? And then breaking it into, like you said, those key results, which are those, what do we do next? Those baby steps that get you there.
The milestones, right? Those things, and then measuring it. This is the one thing that I loved about the book is that I think way too often in the board work that is done in companies that are doing this work, that we set goals, we set objectives, but we don't come back
We
and
don't
kind
come
of get
back to
that
'em.
that temperature gauge
Right.
of where we're at, right? Are we in the green that we're really making progress towards getting to that goal? You know,
Right.
are we in the yellow kind of that temperature that is saying, it's not quite going as well as we would like to, but um, could we change something? Is there some sort of milestone that we need to shift, or a part we need to bring in, or something like that that's going to help us get there, right? Or is it totally in the red? And if it is, then do we just need to scrap that goal altogether and think about something completely new, right? And
Right. Yeah.
so
And I think that what was great is it shares lots and lots of stories, mostly from the tech world. So again, this is not an early childhood book, but lots can be learned about setting goals. And it got me thinking about goals that we're working on and setting with organizations that we work with our own business, and especially that checking in on it regularly. We had that problem. We did a retreat the last 3 years we've had our business. We'd do a retreat in January. We'd have all these big goals, and we worked really hard on them for 3 or 4 months. And then we'd be like, oh yeah, we were going to do that. Maybe we should get to it. Because we weren't revisiting them on that regular basis to keep that kind of, momentum going from that think tank of figuring out what big change you want to make in the world. But I think it also even applies personally.
it did.
To that. It made me think about my personal life and things that, I want to accomplish and get done, and how I need to, revisit that more often than, like everybody, we're just past the new year here, and everybody set all these New Year's, resolutions and goals. And everybody talks about how they get set and then they just kind of fall to the wayside. And that's one thing I really liked about this whole system, is that you're on it, like you're looking at this weekly or bi-weekly, and you're being accountable to say, like she said, green, red, or yellow, where are you? Are you accomplishing it? Are you on your way to accomplishing it? Or was this not an attainable or realistic or even interesting goal that you set in the first place? Do you need to rewrite it? And so I think that those are the kind of things that got me really excited about it.
Me too.
This is your copy. You get just as many Post-its in it. Donna and I love to mess up our books.
I wrote a lot of questions and
Lots of
and,
questions
in the margins and so forth. But
Yeah.
I would say too, personally, I really started thinking about this, and I think the one thing that I have struggled with for years is I've always I write notes, I write sticky notes, I write in notebooks and so forth, but I really want to try to get to this digital world of having everything done digitally, right? So that's my big hairy goal, is that I'm going to move away from the to-do list, right?
I can't let it go. I don't know how to do that.
I'm gonna try to kill a few less trees, even though I will always read paper books. But as far
Did you
as
see digital versions that you can write in and
I know,
I think you can highlight. I don't know.
you can highlight,
Maybe
I don't
you
think
can add
that
notes.
works.
Just such a visual person. Like I'll read something and I'll remember that, oh, it was on that quote I like was on that page where that girl's picture was. You know what I mean? Like I get visual placement of where it was in the book by looking at the book.
Yeah, I don't think I'll ever move away from paper. There are certain books I will always read paper. Certain I would say
figure out how to do
yes.
it, and then maybe I'll try.
So more like my scheduling, right?
Oh,
So
okay.
that kind of stuff, being
Yeah.
more tech savvy, of instead of having 50 million books at the end of the year that I've written all these notes in, is how can I start to keep notes more electronically, how to store them electronically, how to have my
That
to-do
is something
list
I do
electronically.
mine.
Yes.
This voice recording thing that will do voice to text in any application I have open in my computer. So I can do it in email, I can do it in a Word document, I can do it on PowerPoint. I mean, I can do it on anything. So I feel like I think I might turn that on every now and then when I have a meeting and see if it'll type up my meeting notes for me. And then I can just sit and talk to people. And
Right.
that's way more fun, right?
So my first little milestone is going to be how to actually use the pen on my iPad. And I'm going to tackle that, and I can't wait to share with you at some other time of how this move from the print world to the digital world is going for
Right.
me.
Sounds like a good goal. So measure what matters. Highly recommend it. And I think that's about it for us for that. The quote that I talked about with the if you're going to cut someone's hair, they should be in the room. That comes from this book as well. But I think that's it for us for this episode.
Yeah, so, well, that's it for the episode. We want to thank Kim Tice for joining us today from the Ohio AEYC. I hope that you learned some very interesting insights from her and the work that they're doing in Ohio. As Patricia and I said, we love to question everything. We hope that you question too, and we hope you send us those questions. We're really looking forward to in the future to have you asked, we answered, and to bring some of those insights to you, some answers, but also that might drive some of the guests that we have on our
Yeah, let
future
us know who you want to
episodes.
hear from.
Right. So please visit us on our website, which is www.familychildcareexperts.com. So until next time, be the disruptor. Ask all those great questions.